we're going to be doing is a 25% tariff on all cars that are not made in the United States.
25% tariffs that the president announced on imported cars, as well as parts starting next week.
The automotive industry is a tough game, and not everyone can keep up. A single misstep can send even the biggest brands into a tailspin. These aren't just small hiccups. These are the moments when iconic car companies, once staples on the road, suddenly find themselves in the fast lane to nowhere. In this piece, we're taking a close look at 10 car companies now facing serious challenges in the US market. Some of them have been around for decades, earning the trust of millions of drivers, while others seemed primed to take over but are now struggling to keep their momentum. What went wrong? And what's at stake for their future? Buckle up. This is a look at the car brands that could soon find themselves off the road altogether. 10. Honda. In the American car market, Honda is a familiar name. It's known for building reliable, efficient cars that tend to last longer than most people's attention spans. With 1.4 million vehicles sold in the US last year, Honda remains a major player. But beneath that solid number is a detail that changes the story. Around 600,000 of those cars were imported. That's roughly 43% of Honda's US sales. Not built in America, not protected by American manufacturing rules, and definitely not shielded from American tariffs. And that's where the problem starts. The United States has been tightening the screws on imported goods, especially vehicles. Former President Donald Trump introduced a tariff policy that put imported cars and car parts directly in the crosshairs. That tariff could be as high as 25%, a figure that turns imported vehicles from profitable to problematic overnight. For Honda, this is a serious vulnerability. Unlike some American brands that produce the majority of their vehicles domestically, Honda's system relies on a global network. Cars are shipped in from Japan, Canada, and Mexico, and even the vehicles made in the US often contain parts from outside the country. So the reach of these tariffs doesn't stop at finished cars. It hits the supply chain too. You can't just reroute a global operation in a few months. Honda has factories in places like Ohio, Alabama, and Indiana, which produce popular models like the CR-V, Accord, and Pilot. But that's not enough to offset nearly 500,000 vehicles being imported annually. Those US plants can't simply double output overnight to cover the gap. And when the cost of bringing those cars in goes up, either the customer pays more or Honda earns less. Neither is a good outcome. Then there's the issue of competition. Domestic automakers like Ford and GM don't rely on imports as heavily. That gives them a natural advantage in a tariff-heavy environment. If Honda raises prices to absorb the cost of tariffs, buyers might look elsewhere, especially in a market already stretched by inflation and high interest rates. There's also another long-term concern: electric vehicles. While the rest of the industry is racing to build battery-powered lineups, Honda is still catching up. Their current EV presence in the US is minimal. The company has partnered with General Motors to speed things up, but most of those joint projects are still years away from hitting showrooms. Put simply, Honda is trying to move forward while dragging weight behind it. A reliance on imports, a slow EV rollout, and an increasingly protectionist trade policy in the US have all placed Honda in a risky position. They're not falling apart, but they are exposed. And if policy pressures increase, or if rivals gain ground faster in EVs, Honda could find itself fighting for the same market share it used to dominate without question. 9. Hyundai. Hyundai is trying, and I mean really trying. The company has committed $11 billion in investments in the US automotive market. It includes new factories, expanded production lines, job creation, and a bigger presence in electric vehicles. It's a bold move, and it looks great on a headline. But here's the part they don't print in the brochure. That vision is years away. The automotive industry doesn't move quickly. Plants take time to build, workers need training, and supply chains don't just rewire themselves overnight. So, while Hyundai is setting itself up for a more secure future in America, the present reality is far less stable. In 2024, Hyundai sold 836,000 cars in the US. That's a solid number, big enough to make them one of the top foreign brands in the country. But underneath that success is a statistic that undercuts the narrative. 62% of those cars were imported. That means roughly 515,000 vehicles are exposed to US tariffs, up to 25% per unit. Those aren't small numbers. When you're importing more than half your fleet, tariffs don't just nibble at profits. They threaten the foundation of your business model. And right now, there's not much Hyundai can do to fix that quickly. Their US operations include a plant in Montgomery, Alabama, which builds several high-volume models like the Santa Fe and Sonata. But that's one plant, not an empire. The bulk of Hyundai's manufacturing still takes place in South Korea, along with additional support from factories in Czechia, India, and Mexico. That global strategy has worked for years. It allowed Hyundai to balance cost, quality, and logistics. Until now. The shift toward trade protectionism has changed the rules. Hyundai is no longer competing in a global free market. It's competing in a politically fragmented one. And their playbook from the last 2 decades suddenly doesn't work as well. The situation becomes even more complicated when you look at where the industry is headed. Electric vehicles are reshaping the automotive landscape. Hyundai has had early success with models like the Ioniq 5 and Kona EV, but much of that production still happens overseas. Their long-term plan includes building EVs in Georgia, but again, that's part of the future, not the present. In the meantime, American competitors like Ford and GM are already ramping up domestic EV production. Even Tesla, with its controversial CEO and uneven public image, has a clear home field advantage. So Hyundai finds itself in a strange spot, strategically smart but logistically stuck. They're building for tomorrow while being taxed for today, and until those new plants go live and those EV lines are running, they're going to feel the squeeze. What do you think? Will Hyundai's bold investments pay off, or will the tariff squeeze be too much to handle in the short term? 8. BMW is stuck between strategy and reality. On paper, they look like a global powerhouse with sleek German engineering, a luxury image, and just enough performance branding to sell to both dentists and adrenaline junkies. But when you zoom in on the US side of things, BMW has a serious problem, one that can't be fixed with leather seats and a better infotainment system. In 2024, BMW sold about 400,000 cars in the United States. That keeps them competitive in the luxury game. But here's the stat that matters more than any sales chart. 67% of those cars were imported. That's roughly 268,000 vehicles that could now be slapped with a 25% import tariff, thanks to the latest wave of protectionist policies. And that number doesn't even include the parts. Because in the world of high-end auto manufacturing, components are often made halfway across the planet before they ever reach a US assembly line. BMW's biggest manufacturing footprint in the US is their Spartanburg plant in South Carolina, where they build SUVs like the X3, X5, and X7. It's their largest plant globally and a critical part of their American presence. But even that plant has limits. It doesn't make every model. Sedans like the 3 Series and 5 Series, which still make up a big part of BMW's brand image, are largely made abroad, and that's where the vulnerability kicks in. For years, BMW has benefited from a globalized production model. Cars are assembled in Germany, South Africa, China, and Mexico, depending on cost efficiency and logistics. It's smart business, until the rules change. And in the era of America First tariffs, those smart moves start looking like liabilities. What's worse is that BMW's US plant exports a huge percentage of its output to foreign markets. So while it's impressive for PR, it doesn't do much to shield them from domestic tariffs. The company is technically building in America, but much of that building is for everyone except American customers. EVs should be BMW's next frontier, and they've made some headway with their i-Series and electrified SUVs. But once again, production isn't keeping pace with political reality. Most of their EVs are assembled in Europe or China, which puts them right back under the tariff spotlight. They've announced plans to build more EVs in the US, but like Hyundai, those plans are for 2026 and beyond. So BMW is doing what a lot of global automakers are doing right now, juggling long-term strategy while bracing for short-term pain. Their factory in Spartanburg is a good start, but it's not enough. Not when 2/3 of your US sales could suddenly come with a government-imposed surcharge. BMW knows how to build fast cars. Now they have to figure out how to build faster factories. 7. Mazda. Mazda has always been the underdog that punches above its weight. It doesn't sell in massive numbers like Toyota or Honda, but it's carved out a loyal fan base by doing things differently. Zoom, zoom. Remember that? Mazda built its brand around fun-to-drive cars that didn't cost a fortune. It was the brand for people who wanted a little spice in their daily commute without breaking the bank. Well, spice doesn't pay the tariff. In 2024, Mazda sold 424,000 vehicles in the US, which was actually its best year ever. A high-five moment for them, until the US government walked in with a 25% import tariff on all non-American-made cars and slammed the celebration cake straight onto the floor. Because nearly 80% of those Mazdas weren't made in America. That's around 338,000 cars now facing a brutal upcharge. Unlike Toyota or Honda, Mazda doesn't have a deep bench of US factories to lean on. In fact, it has just one US plant, and even that's a joint venture with Toyota in Alabama. And as of now, it's only building a few specific models like the CX-50. The rest are coming in from Japan, Mexico, or Thailand. And thanks to the new tariffs, every one of those cars just got more expensive. A lot more expensive. This isn't just a small bump in the road. This is a massive sinkhole. Mazda is already a niche player. It sells fewer than 1.5 million vehicles worldwide, and half of those sales come from the US market. So when tariffs start pricing out 80% of your American lineup, it doesn't just hurt, it threatens your entire global business model. Mazda can't just shift those units elsewhere. Other markets don't have the volume, and they don't print money like the American car buyer does. And let's be real, Mazda doesn't have the profit margins of luxury brands like BMW or Mercedes to just absorb the cost. If they try to eat the tariff, they bleed cash. If they pass it on to consumers, those buyers walk straight to a Honda dealership and never look back. Either way, it's a lose-lose. Now sure, Mazda is quietly expanding US production with that Alabama plant. But that's a whisper compared to the storm. The factory isn't cranking out hundreds of thousands of cars. And it's not building their bread-and-butter models like the Mazda 3 or CX-30. Most of the lineup is still floating across the ocean and picking up a 25% penalty at the border. 6. Volkswagen Group has always had its sights set on the US market. Whether it's Volkswagen's practical and affordable cars, Audi's luxury tech, or Porsche's speed machines, the group has tried to win over American drivers in a big way. In 2024, Volkswagen Group sold 62,000 vehicles in the US across all three brands: Volkswagen, Audi, and Porsche. Did you know that 72.2% of those cars were imported? That means around 470,000 vehicles now face a 25% import tariff due to new trade rules. That's not just a little bump in the road, it's a serious hit to their business. Let's break it down. Volkswagen itself sold 200,000 vehicles in the US last year. Of those, 120,000 were imported, meaning 60% of their cars were at risk. Audi? Pretty much all of their cars in the US are imported. And Porsche? Well, It's no surprise that luxury cars like the 911 and Cayenne aren't getting built in Detroit. Even though 652,000 sales sounds like a lot, Volkswagen Group is still in fourth place among foreign brands in the US, behind Toyota, Honda, and Hyundai. But the bigger problem is that Volkswagen doesn't have the manufacturing set up in the US to cushion the blow. Volkswagen does have a factory in Chattanooga, Tennessee, where they make cars like the Atlas and the ID.4. But it's just one plant. When you have multiple brands to manage, one factory isn't enough. It's like trying to run a fast food empire with a single kitchen. Audi, they don't even have a factory in the US, so it's all imports for them. That's tough when they're trying to compete with brands like BMW and Mercedes. A 25% tariff is not going to help Audi's case, especially when most of their cars are already on the expensive side. Porsche is in a similar spot. With a smaller lineup of expensive cars, they might be able to handle the price increase for a while, but it's still a big ask. Those prices are already high enough, and a 25% tariff is going to make it even harder for customers to justify. Then there's the issue of car parts. Even if a vehicle is assembled in the US, if parts come from other countries, they'll be taxed too. So even if Volkswagen makes cars in Chattanooga, parts that come from overseas, like the steering wheel or engine, will still face that 25% tariff. Volkswagen's global strategy has always been about building cars where it makes sense and shipping them where they're needed. It worked for years, but with the rise of trade protectionism, that strategy doesn't work as well anymore. The US wants more cars made in America, and for Volkswagen, that's a big challenge. To adapt, Volkswagen would need to build more cars in the US, but that's easier said than done. Building new factories, training workers, and moving production takes years and a lot of money. They don't have the time to wait for that. Meanwhile, competitors like BMW are already making cars in the US, and Tesla is producing vehicles in Texas without missing a beat. So, where does this leave Volkswagen Group? They're in a tough spot. They can't absorb the costs of the tariffs without losing money, but raising prices could drive customers away. They can't quickly shift production to the US either, and that leaves them vulnerable. 5. Kia, the younger, flashier cousin of Hyundai, had a solid showing last year. They moved 796,000 cars in the US, and for a brand that used to be considered the budget option in every conversation, that's a serious evolution. But behind the impressive number is the same structural problem that plagues other foreign automakers in today's tariff-heavy climate. 68% of those vehicles were imported. That's over 540,000 cars rolling into the US from overseas, making them vulnerable to that looming 25% tariff on foreign-made vehicles. It's the exact same issue Hyundai faces. But for Kia, the cushion is thinner. They've got fewer factories, fewer domestic supply chains, and less wiggle room if trade policies tighten any further. The difference is, Kia's popularity is peaking right now. Their SUVs are getting a ton of love, especially the Telluride, which has become a sort of cool family car in the American market. Buyers love its size, design, and price point. It's been a breakout success. But when 2/3 of your inventory is import-dependent, that success becomes extremely fragile. Kia does have a US plant in West Point, Georgia, where they manufacture models like the Telluride, Sorento, and K5. But the volume just isn't high enough yet to offset the risks. They don't have the scale or flexibility to shift production quickly, and their supply chain, much like Hyundai's, is still heavily tied to international parts and components. And here's the long-term issue. Kia's EV portfolio isn't there yet. The EV6 made a splash, but one car doesn't make the lineup. As the market leans harder into electrification, driven by new emissions rules, state mandates, and a flood of federal incentives, Kia can't afford to stay on the sidelines. They'll need a stronger EV push and more domestic production to stay relevant. If they don't act fast, they're not just facing tariffs, they're facing consumer drift. American buyers are becoming more conscious of where their cars are made, especially when local alternatives are priced better thanks to tariff protections and subsidies. Kia's edge in affordability starts to disappear once you factor in the price hikes tariffs bring. In a way, Kia sits in a middle ground, not as vulnerable as Nissan, not as built up as Toyota or Ford. They've got momentum, but it's tied to a supply chain that no longer matches where the US market is headed. Unless they accelerate their investments in American EV production and reduce their import share, Kia could find its recent gains slipping just as quickly as they arrived. 4. Subaru. Subaru has built a reputation in the US for making reliable, rugged cars that handle both city streets and snowy mountain roads with ease. With a loyal customer base and a strong presence in the all-wheel drive vehicle market, Subaru sold 60,000 vehicles in the US last year. But here's the catch: 63% of those cars were imported, meaning around 420,000 vehicles are now facing the looming threat of a 25% tariff on non-US made cars. Subaru's production strategy has always relied on its home base in Japan and a few overseas manufacturing facilities, notably in Indiana. But the company's domestic production is far from enough to shield it from the impact of new trade rules. In fact, 74% of Subaru's cars sold in the US last year were imported, leaving it highly vulnerable to the tariff storm brewing on the horizon. While Subaru does have one key advantage over some other automakers, its strong reputation for safety, durability, and all-wheel drive capability, it won't be enough to fully protect it from this new reality. As the tariffs kick in, those 420,000 imported vehicles could see their prices rise, putting them out of reach for many budget-conscious buyers. Subaru does have a plant in Lafayette, Indiana, but it's still far behind the level of domestic production needed to make a serious dent in the tariff impact. In an ideal world, Subaru would increase production at home to shield itself from tariffs, but that takes time, money, and a lot of effort. And unfortunately for Subaru, time is one thing they don't have. The car market in the US is also shifting. More buyers are looking for electric and hybrid vehicles, and while Subaru has started dabbling in EVs with its Subaru Solterra, it's nowhere near ready to compete with more established players in that space. Plus, increasing production of electric vehicles in the US is another challenge the company faces. 3. Nissan. Nissan can't seem to catch a break. On paper, they had a decent year, 924,000 cars sold in the US during 2024. But those numbers don't tell the whole story. Behind that headline is a much less stable reality. Over 55% of those vehicles were imported, meaning more than 500,000 Nissan cars sold in America are exposed to US tariffs. That's a huge vulnerability. And the situation gets even more complicated. Unlike some automakers who can rely on their US factories to cushion the tariff blow, Nissan doesn't have that luxury. Yes, they assemble some vehicles in the US, most notably in Smyrna, Tennessee and Canton, Mississippi, but that doesn't offer the protection it should. Why? Because Nissan imports most of its parts. So even if the final assembly happens on American soil, the tariff still applies to all those foreign components. It's a tariff trap from both ends, finished imports and imported parts. In short, Nissan isn't just paying once, they're paying twice. This puts them in one of the weakest positions among the major automakers in the US. Their production volume from American plants is nowhere near the level of Toyota or Ford, and they don't have the deep domestic supply chain needed to avoid tariff exposure. Add to that the fact that their financial foundation isn't solid, and you start to see the cracks forming. Their product lineup doesn't help either. Nissan's SUVs like the Rogue and Pathfinder do well, but their sedans and smaller cars have lost ground. The Altima, once a serious competitor to the Camry and Accord, has been slipping in relevance. It doesn't even crack the list of top 20 most American-made cars anymore, and it's facing pressure from all sides: domestic, European, and even Korean rivals. Unlike Toyota or Hyundai, Nissan hasn't made a confident shift toward electric vehicles either. Their Leaf EV, once a leader, now feels like an afterthought. And without a new generation of tech-forward, American-built EVs, the company risks falling further behind as the market changes. If tariffs stick and US buyers continue to lean toward more localized options, Nissan's position could rapidly erode. It's not out of the question that the brand becomes a takeover target. Whether that's a strategic merger with another Japanese giant or an acquisition by a Chinese group like Geely, the warning signs are all there. Nissan isn't just exposed, they're vulnerable, and the clock is ticking. What do you think? Can Nissan turn things around, or are they headed for a major shakeup in the US market? 2. Mercedes-Benz. Mercedes-Benz has long been the poster child for German engineering: sleek sedans, potent AMG models, and an image that commands respect and wherever it goes. In 2024, the brand sold roughly 350,000 vehicles in the United States, a solid foothold in the luxury segment. But beneath that success lies a vulnerability most of their buyers will never see on a spec sheet. 76% of those cars weren't built in America. That means around 266,000 Mercs are rolling onto US lots as imports, immediately exposed to any nationalist trade policies. With Trump's tariffs still dangling overhead, up to 25% on foreign-made cars and parts, Mercedes-Benz faces an unprecedented hit to its profit margins and pricing structure. Mercedes's crown jewel in the US is its Tuscaloosa, Alabama plant, where it assembles SUVs like the GLE, GLS, and GLC. On paper, it's a powerful statement, a luxury German marque investing in American jobs. In practice, it only scratches the surface. That factory pumps out SUVs not just for US buyers, but for export markets too. And those SUVs, while assembled in Alabama, rely heavily on components from Germany, Hungary, and elsewhere, components that are themselves subject to tariffs. So even made in the USA models carry a foreign parts bill that can trigger a 25% surcharge. When the cost of a Mercedes-Benz GLE can already stretch well into six figures, adding thousands of dollars in tariffs isn't just an accounting headache. It's a buyer's deterrent. Will customers absorb a $5,000 price hike on a luxury SUV? Some might, but many will shop around. After all, BMW and Lexus can point to deeper US supply chains, giving them a relative advantage in a market suddenly obsessed with domestic content. Then there's Mercedes's electric pivot, the ambitious EQ lineup, featuring models like the EQS and EQE. These cars are critical to their future, but most are built in Germany, with only small volumes earmarked for conversion at Alabama's battery plant in late 2025. In other words, Mercedes's electric dream in the US remains years away. Until then, every imported EQ model will carry that tariff burden, undercutting the brand's claim to cutting-edge sustainability. Contrast that with Tesla, whose gigafactory in Nevada supplies much of the domestic EV demand. Or Ford, which is ramping up F-150 Lightning production in Michigan. Those brands can lean on local manufacturing to soften, if not eliminate, tariff pressure. Mercedes-Benz simply can't match that speed or scale, leaving them strategically smart but tactically exposed. The result is a luxury paradox, a brand built on precision and performance, now hobbling through a trade policy minefield. Customers expect flawless execution, but tariffs threaten to make Mercedes-Benz the first casualty of America-first auto protectionism. They've invested billions in US facilities and electrification plans, but the benefits are distant. Right now, Mercedes-Benz is caught between two worlds: a global production network disrupted by protectionism, and an American market where every additional dollar on the sticker can send buyers running elsewhere. 1. Toyota. In the car world, Toyota is the one brand that rarely flinches. It doesn't do scandals, doesn't chase headlines, and it sure doesn't lose sleep over the competition. Toyota is the straight-A student of the automotive industry, reliable, efficient, maybe a little boring, but always on top of the class. In 2024, it sold 2.3 million vehicles in the US. That's not market presence, that's market domination. But even A students can get detention when the rules change. Donald Trump's new 25% tariff on all non-American-made vehicles has thrown a wrench straight into Toyota's well-oiled machine. On paper, Toyota should be fine. The company has factories across the US, Kentucky, Indiana, Texas, you name it. They've spent decades investing in American soil, but 40% of the Toyotas sold in the US last year weren't built there. That's 933,000 vehicles now facing the heat of a steep import tax. So while Toyota's image is red, white, and blue, nearly 1 million of its sales are about to get slapped with a 25% surcharge. And for a company built on value, affordability, and long-term trust, that kind of price hike doesn't just sting, it unravels the whole appeal. Toyota's strength has always been its predictability. You knew what you were getting: bulletproof engineering, great resale value, and just enough personality to not fall asleep behind the wheel. But what happens when that trusty Corolla suddenly costs thousands more? What happens when the RAV4 goes from affordable and sensible to borderline luxury price tag? This isn't just a pricing problem, it's a logistics nightmare. Toyota can't simply wave a wrench and start building another 1 million cars in the US overnight. Factories don't pop up like food trucks. Building new ones takes years. Reworking supply chains takes even longer. And most of the parts Toyota uses in its American factories, yeah, those also come from outside the country. And now they're tariff targets too. To be clear, Toyota isn't doomed. It has more US production capacity than most of its foreign competitors, and it's fast when it wants to be. If any international automaker can pivot, it's Toyota. But pivoting still takes time, and time isn't something the market gives out for free. And then there's the broader picture. The electric vehicle race is speeding up. Ford, GM, and even Tesla are already pumping out US-made EVs like they've got something to prove. Toyota is still easing its way in, cautiously testing the waters, but that slow approach no longer works. So yes, Toyota is massive. Yes, it's smart, but in 2025, it finds itself in an awkward place. Too big to fail, but suddenly not too big to be taxed. And unless it finds a way to build faster, cheaper, and cleaner on US soil, the king of the road might need to learn a new route. The road ahead is uncertain for these companies. Whether they pivot or crash, only time will tell if they can recover. Thanks for watching, and we'll catch you in the next one.